In our Christmas series, we have been talking about A Christmas Carol. 2 weeks ago, we began the series. We talked about the ghost of Christmas past. Last week, we talked about the ghost of Christmas present, which then leads us to any guesses as to which ghost we will be talking about this morning? The ghost of Christmas yet to come, otherwise known as the ghost of Christmas future. And this is the ghost that brings nightmares. So I apologize in advance. This is the faceless ghost. This is the ghost that doesn't speak, but just points to different things, and Scrooge is forced to then look at them. In the book, this ghost is referred to as a phantom. So we will be traveling with this phantom for the next 30 minutes this morning to reflect on the future and what that means for us in our lives today. We looked at the past, the present, now let's look ahead in our lives. And the job of this spirit, because every single spirit that Scrooge encountered has a particular job, something that they are trying to show Scrooge about his life. They're trying to pull the curtain back a bit so that he can reflect on how he's living, who he is, and where his life is going. So this ghost of Christmas yet to come, his job, or its job, I guess we should say, is to show Scrooge where his life is heading if he doesn't change course. We're all on a particular path. We're all heading somewhere. The trick is to grow an awareness of where the life that we have created for ourselves is leading. And if we don't take time to reflect on that, if we don't take time to sit in silence, maybe to ask other people, to spend time praying, asking God, well, then the life or the path that we're walking, we can be unaware to where it's going. And Scrooge, he has set his life up, as we've seen, in a very particular way. And if you know anything about A Christmas Carol, the life that Scrooge is leading in the beginning of the story, is it like thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs down. All right, I saw a few of you who are thumbs down. The rest of you, I guess you're on the fence. You're like, oh, maybe it's okay. So yeah, it's thumbs down. It's not great. It's not a generous, open-hearted way of living. Now he comes to the ghost of Christmas yet to come, and the ghost begins showing him the downward spiral that his life will continue to take if he does not begin to live differently. Now, as I read the part in A Christmas Carol about this particular ghost, there was one word that I stopped reading and was like, whoa, there's my sermon right there in The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. Because there's one particular word that Dickens uses that if you're familiar, so when you're reading the Christmas story, there's certain words maybe that pop out to you, or whenever you're reading something, there's words that you remember because you're like, oh, that author just used a really good word. Or there's a picture, there's a phrase, there's something. Well, for me, when I reflect on the story of Christmas that we read in Scripture, particularly in Matthew's account when he talks about the magi, there's a word that has stood out to me for many, many years, and I have not been able to shake that word. And I'll tell you what that word is in a moment. But what happens in A Christmas Carol is that Dickens uses the exact same word that we read in Matthew's account. And I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I am going to go under the assumption that it was intentional, that Dickens knew what he was doing. And I'm going to go with that assumption because I built my entire sermon on that assumption. So, of course, you have to just keep rolling with it. You're not going to be like, yeah, I don't know. No. I'm sure this is what he intended. So let's begin with first A Christmas Carol reading, and then from there we will talk about the magi or the wise men that Matthew writes about in his gospel. So here's A Christmas Carol, and this is right when Scrooge encounters the ghost of Christmas yet to come. So remember, he's already tracking a bit about what these spirits are up to. In the beginning, he wasn't so sure. He was hesitant, but at this point in the story, he is all in. He has seen the gifts of these two spirits, past and present, and now he's waiting expectantly for the gift that the ghost of Christmas yet to come will bring to him. And here's what he says, his inner monologue, when he meets this ghost that, again, does not speak to him. Remember, he was just hanging out with the ghost of Christmas present. This was the most joyful, energetic ghost that you will ever come across. And now he comes across this other ghost who is quite somber and who doesn't speak a word to him. Very different change, a very different shift from one to the other. And here's what he says when he realizes this ghost will not be speaking to him. He resolved, Scrooge, to, and here's the word for me, treasure. This is the word that I want you to remember this morning. If there's one word, one thing that you remember today, it's this word, treasure. And we will come back to this word multiple times throughout the sermon. But this Christmas season, if you remember one thing about sermons here at Awaken, about the Christmas story, remember this word, treasure. What's the word? Okay, I'm going to quiz you all later. So if you guys are playing basketball later, just like yell out treasure at each other if like you want to pass or something, all right? Now, he resolved, Scrooge, to treasure up every word he heard and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared. Because here's the thing about the future. In case you haven't realized this, the future hasn't arrived yet. So what he's about to see, it's not solidified. He can change his future. It's a shadow. This is where things are heading. And if we were to look at our lives and where our lives are heading, it's like a shadow because no one knows the future. We don't know what will happen tomorrow, a week, a year from now. We have no idea. We can think we know what's going to happen, but in reality, the future is simply a shadow because we have not embodied the future yet. So the future is a shadow, and this ghost comes showing him a picture. If he doesn't change, if he keeps going down this path, this is where it will lead. And Scrooge, at this point in the story, he's treasuring all of it. He has his hands wide open to hear, to see what it is that this spirit will reveal to him. Now, this brings us to the story of the magi, the wise men who travel many, many miles. They follow a star in order to give their gifts or their, what's that word? All right. Wasn't as enthusiastic as the first time I asked, so work on that for the next time, please. They come traveling with their treasures in order to present them to the baby Jesus. Here's how Matthew writes this. Matthew chapter 2, verse 9. After they had heard the king, because the magi, they got lost for a bit. They're in a foreign land, so they go and they ask King Herod, hey, can you tell us where this child is, this child who's been born, this child? We've been following his star. King Herod, if you know anything about the story, not a great guy. He doesn't like it. He's not as enthusiastic or joyful as the magi, but he kind of is like, yeah, just kind of go over here and figure this out. So after the magi had spoken to this king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child, where Jesus was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their... Thank you. Yes. You guys are getting it, so good. They bowed down, worshiped him. They opened their treasures, presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, let's study some Greek here this morning. Treasure. And if you notice, some difficult word to pronounce. This is Greek, but the transliteration is right there, so we can all pronounce it together. So continue to last even once you are no longer here. So Scrooge is watching this whole scene, and then the Spirit transports him to another scene, and he brings him to the table of the Cratchit family. And Scrooge watches where this family's life is heading. And if you're familiar with A Christmas Carol, there's a character, they have a son by the name of Tiny Tim, and Tiny Tim is sick. And the Cratchit family, Bob Cratchit, who's employed by Scrooge, they don't have enough money to pay for the treatment in order for Tiny Tim to become well again. Scrooge is watching the decline of Tiny Tim, and he asks the Spirit, what's going to happen? Will he make it? And there's really no answer, but you can tell in the dialogue that the Cratchits are having that Tiny Tim is not in a good place. And he is not going to make it unless someone comes and intervenes in his life. Unless someone comes and provides so that he can have the medical treatment that he needs in order to survive. What you see in this scene is Scrooge's heart continuing to break even more than it was prior. His heart is breaking for this small child who, if someone doesn't do something about his situation, he will be no more. Oh, there's Tiny Tim. Forgot I put him in there. So what's happening here, as Scrooge is watching, he is beginning to treasure something different than his possessions. He's realizing that that which he has built his life on, it doesn't hold as much weight as it had before he met these spirits. So what we're finding here in this moment with the ghost of Christmas yet to come is that his transformation is nearing completion as he watches the product of his life, as he sees the shadow, the future of where things are going, and he doesn't like what he sees. And then the Spirit brings Scrooge to another scene. And this is the moment when Scrooge realizes that everything he's watching in the future is about himself, because the Spirit transports him to his grave. And here's how it's described. It's a churchyard. Where is Scrooge buried? In a church. Here then, the wretched man, and Scrooge is thinking about himself here. He has no idea who this wretched man happens to be. The wretched man whose name he now had to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life. This is a worthy place, but there's no life here. See, we can build our lives in a way where everything looks great. Everything looks perfect. There's all these treasures and physical possessions. We can have it all. But in reality, when you look under the surface, there's no life there. Choked up with too much burying, fat with repleted appetite. And again, we're told, a worthy place. On the outside, everything looks great. If you think about Scrooge's life, he seemed physically to have everything he could ever need. But what was he missing? He was lacking love, connection with others, friendship, being with other people. And so even though it might look like a worthy place, in reality, there was no life here at his grave. This is where his life was going. It was a life that was leading toward death. And then we have a description of where Tiny Tim is going to be buried. This is quite the opposite of what we just read. Here's Bob Cratchit telling his wife, hey, I was just at the place where we're going to bury our son. It's a lovely place. Let me tell you about it. I wish you could have gone, he tells his wife. It would have done you good to see how green of a place it is. The difference between these two burial plots. You have Scrooge. He's in a great place. It's a worthy place. It's ornate. It's like one of the Pharaoh's tombs. It has everything, but yet there's no life there. Meanwhile, Tiny Tim, he's going to be buried just somewhere in the countryside, but it's green. It's luscious. There's life here. I think what's happening in the story here, what Charles Dickens is telling us is that for all of us, there's some treasure, there's some way of living. It leads to the illusion of life. But in reality, it's a death. That's where we have Scrooge in the story. But then there's other things that if we were to treasure these other things, these spiritual, non-physical, these eternal, like love and friendship and loyalty and forgiveness, if we were to embrace those, well, those those treasures lead to life. And they lead to a protecting of your heart. How do you protect your heart? How do you protect your very life? Well, it's in what you value. It's in what you treasure. And there's some things that if you were to value them, they actually take life away from you, while there's other things that if you were to value them, they actually bring more life to your soul. Think about Jesus, this warning in the very beginning of his ministry. Don't store up all these treasures, because in reality, they're not going to lead you to the place where you truly desire to go. So let's wrap it up here for us. Let's ask a question. How do we take this home? How do we reflect on, what's that word again? How do we reflect on treasure? How do we apply the warning of the ghosts of Christmas yet to come to our lives? 2 practices and then a question for us here this week. First, let's look at the magi again as they come bearing their treasure, their gifts. So how do you apply these lessons? You offer your treasures in service to the world. What have you been blessed with? For the magi, they had gold, myrrh, frankincense. These were their treasures. They offered them to Jesus. What are the things that you have been given in life? What are the treasures, the physical treasures that you have, and also the non-physical treasures? Because your treasure could be love, and you offer that to the world in service. Has anyone seen this movie, the best Christmas pageant ever? It's in theaters this year. Took the kids to see it. Great movie, highly recommended. Don't know if it's still out or not. This movie, basically the whole premise of the movie is it's a church, and they're putting on what they hope to be the best Christmas pageant ever. And the church is the church, where you have the religious folk who go to church, the people who you would expect to be in church. And then all of a sudden, this one family who, this is a rowdy family. These are troublemakers, but they hear there's free food in church. So they show up at church, and because of the free food, they end up wanting to stay, and they volunteer to be in the Christmas pageant. And because these are rowdy, violent children, they basically tell all the other good, moral, upstanding kids who go to church every single year, hey, I am going to give you 2 black eyes if anyone else volunteers for the role of Mary, because I want that role. And then my brother's going to be Joseph. And if you don't let him be Joseph, if you raise your hand and say you want to be Joseph, well, then I am going to steal your necklace. That's basically how the whole thing works. And then you have all the craziness that happens in the middle of the movie. Finally, you get to the end where the Christmas pageant is going on, and all the good church people, they don't like that this family has taken over the roles of Mary and Joseph, all the spiritual roles, taking it from their children. But the play director says she's going to go through with it no matter what. Well, there's this part in the movie where you're not sure actually if the kids are going to show up or not, because some things have happened in the movie. They hear people talking negatively about them, but not to ruin it for you, but yeah, they do show up. And 3 of the kids, part of this family, they have the role of the magi, the wise men. And as they come down the aisle, presenting their treasure, their gifts to baby Jesus, you know what they're holding in their hands? It's not gold, frankincense, and myrrh. It's a ham. Now, why does that matter? Because earlier in the story, what you come to realize that the church has donated a ham to this family because the parents they're nowhere around. The kids don't even know where the parents are half the time. They have no money. They can't afford Christmas dinner. So the church has given them, has donated a ham to them so that they can eat a meal. They can have a Christmas feast. What do these three children bring and lay down at the feet of Jesus? Their most treasured possession, their Christmas ham. What are your most treasured possessions? The things that you value. How do we apply what the ghost of Christmas yet to come is saying to us? We offer our treasures, that which we have been blessed with in service to the world, so that we can continue in the way of Jesus and bring love, peace, healing, and joy to the world. Second way, don't try and control the future with your treasures. This is what Scrooge was trying to do the entire beginning of the story. He was so afraid that he was going to be poor. He was so afraid that he was going to lose it all. He was living from fear. When we try to control where our lives go with our treasures, we end up living from a place of fear. And we lose that which we truly desire, which is connection, family, friends, love, peace in our life. Scrooge had no peace, all because he was living from fear, trying to control where his life was going. The better way is to live with open hands, wondering, where's this going to take me? If I live from a place of love, well, I know it's going to take me. There might be difficulties, hardships, of course, but I know ultimately it's going to lead me into a good place, a place where I truly desire for my life to go. And then a final question for us, a question for us to reflect on in this moment this week. Are the ways I'm using my treasures bringing life or death to those around me? Tiny Tim, his way of living was bringing life. Scrooge, his way of living was bringing death. So as we think about what we are building our lives on, the things that we treasure, is it leading towards life, which is what Jesus came to this world to give, or is it leading towards death? Maybe things look good on the outside, but underneath there's rot and decay. Let's reflect on that this week, and let's journey with the ghosts of Christmas yet to come for this week and learn the lessons that this phantom has to teach us as we reflect on the birth of Jesus and the hope, the joy, and the peace that is being offered to us this Christmas season.